In August 2025, the Ford Carrier Strike Group had been doing what American sailors have done here for 40 years, keeping the North Atlantic open, protecting the arteries of trade, making sure flat-packed furniture could still reach American living rooms. It was routine, until a circling aircraft detected something that would trigger the most intense submarine hunt since the Cold War. Not a loud contact, not a mistake, a deliberate approach. Unknown to the Americans, the Russians had just received orders from the Northern Fleet. Close with the Americans, collect everything, not weapons, information, radar emissions, acoustic signatures, formation behavior. The things you study when you're preparing for the day you might actually fight. But Moscow was about to learn why challenging the US Navy in the Atlantic is about as smart as telling your wife she's gained 10 pounds. Inside the Ford's Combat Information Center, the tactical action officer watched the submarine vectors with the calm that comes from having 4 Arleigh Burke destroyers nearby. Destroyers with enough ordnance to turn any submarine into an artificial reef. At the Russians' current speed, they would reach torpedo range in exactly 47 minutes. The math was simple for the Russians. Once launched, their torpedoes would cover the remaining distance in under 6 minutes. But the Ford's escorts carried ASROC, anti-submarine rockets, weapons that could reach a submarine position in 90 seconds. The Russians weren't approaching a carrier, they were approaching a layered moving trap. At 15:03, the Admiral asked for probable intent. The answer was obvious. At their speed and heading, they would be within intelligence collection range in 40 minutes, close enough to start recording, close enough to start cataloging, close enough to start building a blueprint. The recommendation was to go to general quarters, but the Admiral's response was pure American confidence. Let's see how badly they want to embarrass themselves first. That's assuming they could even maintain their approach undetected, because within seconds, Link 16 automatically shared the submarine data across every NATO asset in the region. And what happened next was like watching a SWAT team respond to someone trying to rob a lemonade stand. A British Type 23 frigate conducting exercises 50 miles north immediately turned south at flank speed. Gas turbine spooling, bow wave rising. 8P-8 Poseidon scrambled from bases in Scotland, Norway, and Iceland, each one a $130 million submarine hunter, a flying sensor suite that could hear a shrimp sneeze at 500 meters depth, and beneath the surface, the Virginia-class submarine that had been shadowing the Russians since they left port 3 days ago finally got permission to make her presence felt. Not with a weapon, with positioning, with pressure. At 15:15, the tactical picture went from interesting to comedy gold. The Russians executed what they thought was a clever deception. One submarine ascended to 200 meters, making deliberate noise. Pumps louder, control surfaces sloppy, a decoy meant to draw attention. While the other 2 went deep, trying to slip in undetected. Classic Wolfpack thinking. 1943 thinking. Except this was 2025. And NATO's acoustic processors could tell the difference between a loud decoy and 2 quiet submarines that still sounded like a broken wheel in a shopping cart. The Russians weren't just being aggressive. They were running a coordinated intelligence operation that would have been cutting edge in 1985. They wanted to record the Ford's acoustic signature, map the escort formation, catalog radar emissions, collect the entire electromagnetic spectrum. All valuable intelligence if you're planning to fight the US Navy. But the problem for the Russians was they had no idea what was coming next, because ships and aircraft were already converging like a swarm of piranhas. By 1600, the first P-8 arrived overhead, and the 3 Russian submarines were about to learn what hammering meant in NATO terms. The P-8 is a Boeing 737 that gave up carrying tourists to Florida to become the world's most sophisticated submarine hunter. It costs $130 million, and it can hear a dolphin argue with its spouse at 500 meters depth. The P-8 started its work by dropping sonobuoys in what's called a boxing pattern. Directional command activated sonobuoy systems. Underwater microphones with attitude. They don't just listen, they shout. They scream at submarines until the ocean gives up a position. These buoys cost more than most Russians make in a year, and NATO was giving them away like they were going out of style. One splash and then another, a grid spreading across the sea like a net tightening. Each buoy began pinging active sonar at 140 decibels. For reference, that's louder than a gunshot, and it's happening inside a metal tube. Imagine being locked in a shipping container while someone plays drums on the outside forever. Inside the Kazan, the first ping hit like someone had replaced their submarine with a giant bell, and the rock had just taken a swing. The sonar operators ripped off their headphones so fast they probably needed neck surgery. That beautiful silent service reputation, gone. They were now the loudest thing in the ocean. Like a Harley Davidson at a meditation retreat. Every 30 seconds, ping, no escape, no relief, just ping. While the Russians were running in circles trying to find a way out of the box, the P-8 crews were living their best life. Fresh crews every 4 hours. Actual food. Bathrooms that didn't share space with nuclear missiles. They were basically operating from a flying WeWork. While the Russians were trapped in the underwater equivalent of a Spirit Airlines middle seat, but the U.S. Navy was just getting started. Time for the Arleigh Burke destroyers to earn their paychecks. They activated their bow-mounted sonar, a spherical array containing hundreds of transducers, listening for echoes bouncing off submarines like underwater radar, and they joined the acoustic assault. These systems can pump out so much acoustic energy that fish near the ship literally get stunned. The Russians weren't just being hunted. They were experiencing what happens when America decides to use the ocean as a concert speaker. Then came the simulated attack runs. P-8s diving from 25,000 feet, screaming toward the ocean like they were about to drop weapons. The Russian submarine crews, already running on no sleep, had to assume each run might be real. Emergency dive, blow ballast, hard rudder, over and over. It was like playing that hand slap game where someone fakes you out 50 times. You flinch every time, even when you know they're messing with you. The Kazan tried the submarine equivalent of flooring it in a police chase. A 30-knot sprint to break contact. The OK-650V reactor pushed 43,000 horsepower through the water, which sounds impressive, until you realize it made them sound like someone threw a washing machine full of hammers down an elevator shaft. But why would the Russians put up with all this? Because the Ford isn't just a ship, it's an ecosystem. Look at the radars on the Ford's mast. Every radar has a fingerprint. Specific frequencies, pulse patterns, power levels. Collect those, and you can build jammers designed to blind them. They were recording the electromagnetic spectrum, cataloging every emission. They were watching flight operations. The carrier launches aircraft every 90 seconds during sustained operations. That pattern tells you shift schedules, maintenance windows, vulnerability periods. They were mapping which escorts used which data link channels, how the formation communicated, who talked to who, building a digital blueprint of American carrier operations, intelligence that would shape missiles, torpedoes, and tactics for years. Except NATO wasn't going to let them finish their homework assignment. All 3 submarines launched acoustic decoys, devices designed to mimic submarine sounds and confuse pursuers. NATO's response was beautiful. Their computers classified each decoy in about 1/3 of a second, basically said that's cute, and maintained perfect tracking on all 3 real submarines anyway. It was like watching someone try to escape the cops by throwing a mannequin out of the car, while the cops already have helicopters, satellites, and your license plate. And it was only going to get worse from here. By hour 24, NATO had turned submarine hunting into performance art. A British ship arrived with her Type 2087 towed array sonar, dragging 2 kilometers of hydrophones. Underwater microphones stretching behind her like a ribbon of judgment. MH-60. Romeo helicopters started taking shifts, hovering 50 feet above the water, lowering dipping sonar straight down. The Russians tried to hide using thermal climb layers, underwater temperature boundaries that can deflect sonar. Too bad dipping sonar goes straight through them like they're not even there. It's like trying to hide from your wife behind a glass door. But despite how easy these aircraft made it look, the coordination was insane. One wrong move, One bad altitude call and someone collides. To prevent that, NATO carved the airspace into blocks, P-8s between 20,000 and 25,000 feet, helicopters below 500, horizontal separation measured in thousands of feet. Each nation assigned specific radio nets, Americans on ultra-high frequency, British on very high frequency, Norwegians on both because someone always has to translate. Every aircraft had an assigned patrol box, aerial parking spaces. You don't leave your box without permission. The airborne controller was juggling aircraft from 3 nations, each with different fuel limits, sensors, and rules. At Northwood, a data fusion center combined sensor feeds in real time, building a 3-dimensional tactical picture that looked like the world's most expensive video game. But this was real life, and NATO sailors were having a grand old time. Helicopters would hover directly above the submarines, lower sonar, start pinging. The Russian crews could probably feel it in their teeth. Meanwhile, the Arleigh Burke destroyers weren't just using bow sonar. They deployed their AN/SQR-19 towed arrays, dragging their own underwater microphones, catching every sound the Russians made. Rumor has it one Russian submariner asked his captain if they could just surface and apologize because the pings were hurting his tummy. The Russians weren't just being hunted, they were being surrounded by sensors. The submarines soon had more sonar contacts on their screens than a Kardashian has Instagram notifications. P-8s above, helicopters at medium depth, surface ships circling. This wasn't hunting anymore. This was a smackdown. NATO turned the Norwegian Sea into a 48-hour EDM festival. Russia couldn't find the exit, and the base never stopped. But here's the beautiful part. Remember that Virginia-class submarine we mentioned? For 48 hours, that American submarine maintained perfect trail position, using its TB-34 towed array, running so quiet on electric motors that it was basically a ghost with torpedoes. The crew watched it unfold like a Netflix documentary called Making a Submariner: Why Russia Can't. They were recording every sound, every evasive maneuver, every desperate attempt to break contact. The Russians tried everything, hide in underwater canyons. NATO positioned helicopters directly overhead with dipping sonar like fishing in a barrel. Changed depth radically. Destroyer sonar tracked them from surface to sea floor, sprint and drift. The American submarine matched every move like a dance partner who knew the routine better than they did. At one point, the American captain decided to send a message. One quick pulse of active sonar from the BQQ-10 bow array. Not enough to give away exact position. Just enough to let the Russians know they'd been followed the entire time. Imagine being stalked by John Cena for 2 days. You can't see him, but he's definitely there, and he occasionally whispers that you can't see him. It was psychological warfare. By day 2, P-8 crews developed a system. They timed sonar pings to prevent REM sleep cycles, just as the Russian crews started to drift off. Ping. It's like having a roommate who sets an alarm every 5 minutes but never gets up. After 48 hours of this, Russian sailors were probably seeing colors that don't exist and having conversations with people who weren't there. And it still wasn't over, because desperation always comes at the end. After 48 hours, the 3 Russian submarines tried to run. They used every trick in the Soviet handbook, which would have been great if this was 1982. And NATO hadn't written the handbook. Bottom terrain. P-8 switched to magnetic anomaly detection, radical depth changes. Destroyers tracked them anyway. Launch every remaining decoy. NATO systems catalog them like Pokemon cards. Gotta catch them all, and they're all worthless, well, most of the time. After several hours, the Russians learned the truth. Trying to break contact with NATO in the Norwegian Sea is like trying to lose the IRS during tax season. They know where you are, where you're going, and how much you owe. The Russians finally had to abort the mission, which in military terms means running away while pretending it was the plan all along. They withdrew north, still submerged, probably composing reports about a successful reconnaissance operation. An operation that definitely did not involve 48 hours of acoustic hammering. NATO maintained contact as they withdrew, like bouncers escorting someone out of the club. The P-8s followed part of the way, Not because they had to, but to make sure the message landed. Everyone knows what happened. We're just keeping up appearances. During those 48 hours, NATO collected enough acoustic intelligence to recognize those submarines from space. Every pump, every valve, even how their toilets flush, all of it now lives in NATO's database. Russian state media spun it as a successful intelligence-gathering mission. Sure, and the Titanic successfully tested its ice detection capabilities. They learned the Norwegian Sea is less contested waters and more NATO swimming pool. The overall lesson was simple, but profound. You can build all the advanced submarines you want, but if you can't handle 2 days of democracy's greatest hits played over active sonar, maybe don't go in the deep end next time. Tap to watch for more.